I'm Rod Colgate. In 1974, I was 17 years of age and a student at Seton Boys Technical High School. Some of the teachers had got together and came up with the idea of having a four-wheel drive trip to Uluru, Ayers Rock. Students were asked to make an application of interest, and when enough was generated, the trip was organised for the May School holidays of 1974, from Saturday the 4th of May to Saturday the 18th of May. This is my memories of the trip, along with John Birrell, who was a technical studies teacher at the time. A convoy of four-wheel drive vehicles was acquired from interested teachers, school families and four-wheel drive enthusiasts. 1958 Austin Gypsy four-wheel drive driven by John Birrell, a teacher. A 1967 FJ45 Land Cruiser station wagon driven by Wayne Reynolds, a teacher. A Land Rover station wagon driven by Phil Wilkins, a teacher. Volkswagen Beetle modified to a semi-buggy driven by Bruce Yates, a teacher. A 1974 FJ40 short wheelbase Land Cruiser driven by Colin Brown, a student parent. A 1973 FJ55 Land Cruiser station wagon with power take-off power winch driven by Ron Child, a member of the South Australian Land Cruiser Club. I was a passenger in this Land Cruiser. Ron and I built up a great relationship over the trip as I became his winch man for recoveries. 1964 Nissan Prince Miller 1-ton ute used for carrying our food supplies, known as the Chuck Wagon, driven by Trevor Moyle, a student of the school. 1974 the Bitumen Road stopped at Port Augusta. There was only dirt and more dirt into the outback of South Australia. Day 1 we headed north to Port Augusta and then camped next to the railway line at Hesso. Can't remember everyone's sleeping arrangements, but the students in Ron's Land Cruiser set up camp each night by slinging a tarp from the roof of the Land Cruiser and pegging it to the ground, with another ground sheet to sleep on in our sleeping bags. That night I can clearly remember the train coming past and one of the wheels glowing red hot in the dark as it went past. Ron would often fry chips for us in his spade over the fire. What a neat trick. Day 2. We travelled easily through Woomera to Andamuka via Arkuna station. We camped in the sand dunes north of Andamuka. John can remember scorpions appearing out of the sand near the campfire when the air around it became warm. Day 3. Andamuka to Stewart Creek Station. John had taken along a Flying Doctor radio and was regularly in contact with locals in Adelaide, and was advised that the rain had flooded all roads back to Pimba and it was impassable. All the drivers of our convoy got together and a decision was made to press on to the Unadada track. We took the access track along the dog fence. Conditions were extremely wet and boggy. The convoy travelled for 12 hours and only managed to travel 20 kilometres. At one stage, 7 out of the 8 vehicles were bogged. This is when Ron Childs and I started working as a team, with a winch on his 4x4. Ron would say, "Okay, all out except for Rod. Jump in the front, we're going to winch them out." The thrill of his 4x4 revving like mad as we thrashed our way through the mud was exciting. A memory stamped in my mind forever. A boy's own adventure and the beginning of my love of four-wheel driving. I can distinctly remember jumping out of the cruiser and going knee-deep into the mud, then having to drag the winch cable to the bogged vehicles and coming back to the winch to guide the cable onto the winch with my hands in wet, muddy leather gloves. One time while doing this, the winch cable broke and I fell backwards as a shackle on the end of the cable came flying back and hitting the bonnet and the bull bar of the cruiser. Another time I was guiding the cable onto the winch. The strain of the winch was increasing and Ron's Land Cruiser was slowly creeping forward towards me. Ron didn't realise as I was below his line of sight and I was so deep in the mud I couldn't move. Just as well to have high clearance. We We always had to connect the VW Beetle by cable to a pair of four-wheel drives when doing creek crossings, as it would start to float and head downstream. Well, it looks like it's time to empty it out. We made it to Stewart Creek Station that night, and the students were allowed to sleep in the shearer's shed, but we had to clean them out first. Dust, dirt, cobwebs and mouse droppings all through the place. Records showed from the 5th to the 12th of May 1974 that heavy rain caused major flooding in South Australia's Outback. The flooding between Port Augusta and Woomera stranded up to 600 people on Outback tours. Andamooka was flood-bound and inaccessible for well over a week, and food drops were necessary. During the early hours of the morning, 25 millimetres of rain fell in 20 minutes. The Stewart Creek Station was on a slight gibberstone hill. The water was running off the hill and the mice were on the move back into the shearers' quarters. I woke up in a fright as mice were crawling all over me, but it was dry at least. Everyone was wide awake by 5 a.m. John Hunter, the manager of the Stewart Creek Station, advised us to get out to Koodymookah railway siding as soon as possible, or risk being trapped by the floods for 2 months. History showed he was correct. Day 4. At dawn we left for Koodymookah. As we travelled, all the convoy was strung together with cables as the water was rising all around us. Koodymookah was a manned railway siding for the old Ghan narrow rail gauge railway line, which was still in use. The gangers were a strange, rather unusual group of men. Day 5, we had a rest day at Koodymookah to check over things and recuperate. The railway gangers went out on a section trolley and found that the Margaret River was flooded to the north and the Gregory River was flooded to the south. The Gregory River is an overflow of Lake Ayers, with the water usually flowing south, but this time flowing north at 2.5 metres deep, flowing into Lake Ayers South. No trains were due because they were stranded at Maree and the line had been washed away in places. So John, in his Austin Gypsy, tried to drive across the railway bridge over the Margaret River by straddling the railway line, but found the railway sleepers were all too rotten on the end and breaking away under the weight of his 4x4. The decision was made to try for Andamooka instead of Uluru. The rest of the day was filled with maintenance and swimming. On day 6, the gangers had been out for an early morning inspection on their section trolley to report that the Gregory River was dropping and we may be able to get across to Maree. As we were getting low on fuel, we loaded up John's Austin Gypsy with jerry cans. Ron travelled along with him in his Land Cruiser with a winch for backup if needed for the crossing of the Gregory River. The Gregory River still looked a bit high, so John connected the cable from the Land Cruiser winch to the Gypsy and proceeded successfully across the river. With John's safe arrival on the other side, Ron retrieved the cable and headed back to Koodymookah, and John continued on to Maree. On arrival at Maree, the crowds were amazed at where he had come from and didn't think it was possible to come from further up the railway line and cross the Gregory River. There were 2 trainloads of passengers stranded at Maree, and they were milling around to see and hear the story of a 4x4 that came from where? John returned to Koodymookah with the easy crossing of the Gregory River. The water levels had continued to drop while he was in Maree. Day 7. After refuelling, all the vehicles were set off in the morning and drove to Maree with an easy crossing of the Margaret River. All the 4-wheel drives refueled in Maree. This is a group photo taken in Maree, and that's me sitting up on the bull bar. All the phone lines had been reported as being down, so it was great foresight by John to bring the Flying Doctor radio along. John had purchased it second hand and repaired it himself, and had made an application for a special licence for the use of the trip. John set up his single sideband Flying Doctor radio and used the call sign 9 Sierra Yankee Mike and radio telegrams to Adelaide to explain what had happened. The messages were then sent on to our parents. The travelled down the Maori Road to the Farina Creek. But on arrival, we found it was too flooded and impassable, so we camped the night. Here's John, checking the levels of the Farina Creek to see if it's possible to cross. We used the flowing creek to wash ourselves. I can distinctly remember feeling the small stones hitting against my legs as the current washed them past. We were jumping in and letting the flow of the creek wash us along, and then jumping to the shore around 20 to 30 metres downstream. It was great fun. We camped the night at the lower Farina Creek. Day 8. In the morning, when the water levels had dropped, we got all the vehicles across the lower Farina Creek and started on our way to Parachuna Gorge. The Nissan Prince, our chuck wagon, had broke a timing chain tensioner just before the Parachuna Creek crossing in the Parachuna Gorge. Nissan had to be towed to our camp by the Parachuna Creek crossing. That night, John cut a section of pipe from the top of a disused windmill to make a temporary chain tensioner. A very late night. This was bush mechanics at its best. John's starter motor in the Gypsy had filled with mud and it stopped working, and with no time to fix it, his only option was to hand crank start it from then on. Day 9. This day we headed to Blinman through the flooded Parachuna Creek. We came across Jack Thompson, the Australian actor, with two girls he called his sisters. He was filming Sunday Too Far Away at Corn at the time. We had to rescue him and pull him out just so that we could get past. We camped just outside of Blinman for the night. Bill Wilkerson's daughter celebrated her 6th birthday on the camp, so we made a cake with 6 candles. Day 10 was a day of disappointment. From Blinman, we tried heading to Arkaroola, but the road was deep with liquid mud in many places. There were continual boggings and retrievals throughout the day's travel. The Land Rover station wagon had a 6-cylinder Holden engine under the bonnet, and this tended to rev higher to produce the torque required for 4-wheel driving. This caused the rear stub axle to shear during a creek crossing. To keep it going, the rear tail shaft and universal joints were disconnected, and it had to continue the rest of the trip in front-wheel drive only. We finally arrived at Witaluna Creek, but the creek was flowing way too fast to cross, so this is where we stayed the night. The weather was just continual rain without any breaks to set up a camp or shelter, so we camped by the creek and slept sitting up in the vehicle in our sleeping bags. We had bush biscuits spread with butter and Vegemite for dinner. It was just getting all too hard, so it was decided to head back to Adelaide in the morning. Day 11. In the morning we set off for Wilmington. A lot of time was lost again this day. Bogging after bogging. It was just Groundhog Day. We made it to Wilmington and stayed the night at the beautiful Valley Caravan Park and camped the night. John can remember a student standing way too close with his back to the fire and his jeans catching on fire. Thank goodness we had an ex-nurse, Dot Childs, with us to administer first aid. Day 12. The bitchin' is just so much easier, and it was back to Seaton to dry out. These 12 days away in the flooded outback of South Australia came at a great time in my life. As a 17-year-old, it gave me the opportunity to mature. The teamwork, camaraderie and mateship between the teachers and the students was truly life-changing. As an older student, the barriers between student and teacher were broken away, and I was accepted as an adult as our relationships changed. We had become reliant on each other to get through the days of challenges. This put me in great standing for the future. It was only another 8 months and I was in the workforce as an adult, starting my apprenticeship as a fitter and turner. This experience started my passion and love for four-wheel driving and the remoteness of the Australian outback. I thank John Birrell, Ron Childs and all the other adults who went along on this adventure for their enthusiasm and dedication to make this trip happen, especially for taking on the responsibility of the well-being and safety of the students. Thank you so very much.